Straight on to our next talk, which is Carys Shannon, and she's going to be talking about theatre in the ESL classroom. So over to you, Carys.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Neil. Hi, everyone. Hello, world. Good afternoon. That was really interesting listening to Chris. Actually, I wrote for the journal in the last issue, and it was really lovely working with him. So it's nice to put a face to the name. This talk is Theatre in the ESL classroom, and I'm going to say from the beginning that it's a very practical talk, as practical as it can be when it's an online seminar, and I'm going to give you lots of ideas, hopefully, that you will be able to take straight to the classroom and try out. I've been teaching as a language teacher for about 5 years now, but before that, and during that as well, I worked in professional theatre for about 10 years, both behind the scenes, occasionally on stage, but a lot of work running drama workshops and drama skills workshops. So when I became a language teacher, I naturally brought those skills with me into the classroom. And it's been a really fascinating journey finding out how they can be useful and how to use them in a way that builds confidence and is productive for everybody. So today is going to be based around that idea, and let's get started. So I wanted to ask people, first of all, what everybody thinks theatre skills are. So if you are able to write me an answer in the chat box, that would be fantastic. Doesn't have to be a long answer, just an idea of when someone says theatre skills, what do you automatically think of? And then we'll see if people are thinking the same thing or if there are any differences in opinion. While people are doing that, and thank you for doing that, I think a lot of people are already using theatre skills in the classroom because it's something that goes naturally hand in hand with dynamic language teaching. So we've got here a couple of comments. We've got role play, improvisation, performing dialogue, being able to express yourself with body and voice. I like this one, thanks Elena, the ability to laugh at yourself, mime, learning lines, role plays, being creative. Okay, so thank you. I would agree with all of those and make a distinction at the same time that when we're talking about theatre skills, we're talking about theatre activities, which are things like role play, improvisation and performance. And the actual skills, I think, are much wider than that and go into the context that somebody's mentioned already of being creative and being able to express yourself. So I'll just move on. This is my list. It's not infinite or finished by any means. It's my opinion. And I think for me, as someone who's worked in the theatre for a long time, often I find that people are quite afraid to use theatre in the classroom, mainly because they're worried about losing control, because they see it as something that is highly energetic, very physical, that you may need a lot of space for, and that often students are going to go crazy with this newfound freedom or the ability to stand up or move around. And I just always say when I'm talking about it that it's so much more than that, and actually without discipline, as in self-discipline, there is no theatre. And one of the most important skills in theatre, you can see at the top here, is empathy. I think empathy in terms of listening skills, which it mentions a bit further down, and I say that, I mean really listening. Active listening would be a topic for a whole other talk, but when you're in a performance space and you're relying on the other performers to communicate to you with their voices and their bodies, you as an individual, as a participant, are listening. And probably because of the spontaneity of the moment. You're actively listening because you don't know exactly what's going to happen next. And that's the difference usually between, you know, someone who's an actor and someone who is a great actor. A great actor, no matter how many times they've performed the same scene or said the same lines, they are still listening actively with their body, with their whole body, and they are waiting to be given signals from the other performer. And that's when I think, if you've ever been in a performance or even in the cinema and you've seen something that's really electric, that's usually because that actor is really listening. So theatre encourages listening and empathy and awareness of others. It also very much encourages an awareness of self, because obviously you're accessing your own emotions and your own memories. Depending on what kind of work you do with theatre skills in your classroom, you can even go so far as to ask people where they are feeling a particular emotion in their body, also to physicalize, to show in a mime or a gesture or a facial expression, you know, what that emotion means to them. And obviously memory work is hugely powerful in terms of language recall, and I think it's a very useful skill. Something that is certain is that theatre skills are about using your body, not always your voice, but often your voice to express ideas, to represent ideas, to communicate. It means that theatre activities within reason, within the context of class preparation, can be very low prep for a teacher, although you do need to give your complete focus and energy in the moment, but that's usually the same with everything. But in terms of needing a stage or needing costume or lights or a script, you absolutely don't need any of those things. As I said, as people mentioned earlier, a lot of people are already using role play improvisation in the classroom, and you can see that integrates perfectly into language learning, also using course books and bringing course books alive. So one point to mention that is important is this creating shared contexts. So creating an idea of something, for example, an idea of a vocabulary set that's represented physically in a theatre activity, but that's shared by everybody. And then from that moment on, people are sharing that same context together. They're recalling that visual picture, perhaps, or depending on how they learn, what they heard or how they felt in that moment. And that's a really valuable learning tool. One thing that I often emphasize is that theatre space should be a safe space and a space where anything can happen. So to encourage people to feel spontaneous, wild, free, all of those wonderful things that performance gives you, that space needs to be clearly marked in terms of safety. And by safety, I'm talking about obvious physical health and safety, but also emotional safety. That it's clear from the moment that you begin doing these activities that it's a supportive atmosphere, that any contribution that's appropriate is welcome, that there's no correct answer, that there's no right way to do something, there's no correct interpretation. And I think sometimes when you're teaching, that can be hard to remember. Sometimes you want a specific result, and you're pushing for that. But I often encourage teachers when we're looking at this in a workshop context to let people run with an idea and see where it takes them, and then see what you can extract out of it in regards to the original idea or the original objective that you had. Teamwork is obvious, people working together, and also a respect, which we'll talk about in a moment, between audience and performers. And lastly, the discipline aspect. A lot of people think, as I said earlier, that theatre is something that can run wild. if you're not disciplined in your body and your voice in terms of how you use them, and also disciplined to find silence when it's needed, to finish an exercise when a signal is given, then there can't be any theatre, because it needs focus, it needs to be watched or to be experienced. And in order to do that, you need discipline. And I always build discipline into my class routines when I'm using theatre as a first exercise. Okay, so talking typically about the learning styles, which I know these days are slightly controversial, so we won't spend too much time on it. As I've already said, we've got the different learning styles, and depending on whether you are remembering something that you saw, something that you heard, or how you experience something, then there is also something for everyone in that sense, because all different styles of learning, or let's just say participation, can be catered for. One thing that I think is important is not to force people to participate, which again, it can be difficult. We're in a language class, we want people to create output, but sometimes just being in the circle, as we say, because usually there are a lot of circle activities, just being in the circle is enough. And also finding out how somebody feels comfortable enough to contribute. For example, if you are doing a role play and you're role playing a news item, then there is an option there for someone to be a cameraman and simply say 3, 2, 1, action. And that's what they say when they stand up in front of their peers and do it, because that helps them to feel comfortable and build confidence. So I think demand discipline early on, but participation is bit by bit. And my personal rule is never to ask anybody, any participant, to do anything that I'm not prepared to have a go at myself, which includes all the things that need talent: singing, dancing, moving, representing. And I can honestly tell you that I'm not talented in all of those, if any. I'm not sure. I'm definitely not a singer. But if I ask a group to sing a rhythm or a rhyme, then I'm always there with them 100%. Modeling, obviously, but also laughing at myself and participating. And I think when you're trying to encourage participation, particularly if there are any confidence issues in your group, then that's something that can be particularly important. Okay, so moving on, the audience and the performers. So very quickly, it's quite obvious, but it's worth spending a bit of time on with your group. One can't exist without the other. So you can enjoy theatre, but someone's always watching. You can improvise for your own enjoyment, but usually for it to be satisfying, it needs to be seen. So depending on what exercise I'm doing, I often create a space, call it the imagination space, theatre space, magic space, the space, whatever you want, or ask your students to name it. And I usually walk through it with the students and ask them, if this is the performance space, who is here? The actors, okay. And who is on the other side? The audience. And then I often ask them, what do you want to be? And usually everybody wants to participate, especially if you're working with young learners. So we all go then into the performance space, and I ask, well, what happens now? Does this work? Who's watching? And just that very simple couple of minutes doing that gives an appreciation that, yes, most people want to be watched when they're doing something. Then we all move into the audience space and do the same thing. If we are all audience, well, what are we watching? Who's performing? And so we have an agreement immediately that there's a respect between audience and performer. And then we also ask, what makes a good audience? And usually it would be obviously a very British thing, the applause, saying well done, being supportive. And being a good performer means being focused and giving 100% of what you can to the performance. So that often helps to contextualize things. Okay, So the next part is talking about different practical exercises that you can use in the classroom from this moment with very little preparation time, thinking about how you can bring your course book alive or your syllabus alive with these things. Okay. So these are all circle games which would involve the whole group being in a circle before you start. The pulse game is simply, let's see if I can put it on camera, everybody holding hands at their sides, but clasping hands like this. One person pulses, which is squeezes the hand of the next person. When you feel the squeeze of your neighbor's hand, you need to squeeze your other hand. So for example, if someone squeezes your left hand, you then squeeze your right hand, which should squeeze another person. And that pulse or that rhythm is passed silently around a circle. It's a good game to get people to really focus in. You say we're going to do theatre, everyone goes, yeah, great, this is going to be great, they're hyperactive. And a pulse game brings them down. Sometimes you get more than one pulse going because people are nervous and they just squeeze away. That's fine. If people are actively listening to each other, then that's great. A physical warm-up, simply going through, jumping, running on the spot, doing some letters, tongue twister, imagining chewing a huge chewing gum to warm up your mouth. When you can see each other doing that, you can laugh. Nobody feels stupid. Partner work. We've got icebreakers, and a very simple one that I use is asking people still in the circle but to turn to face opposite somebody so that you're facing your partner, and you simply count to 3. So I say 1, my partner says 2, and I say 3, and we repeat 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What happens is it's more difficult than it looks and people often laugh. That breaks the ice, but a great way to use this is as a vocabulary drilling activity. So you say, okay, we're going to replace number 1 with a word and a gesture. You can decide if you want to make it free-for-all or if you want to make it more structured. So for example, I might say, ooh, 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 monkey, 2, 3. My partner says, ooh, 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 monkey, 2, 3. And you repeat it, and you replace numbers 2 and 3 with vocabulary and repeat to and fro. A lot of laughing, a lot of fun, and a great way to warm up. And the last one is more of a settler, simply sitting or standing in a circle in silence and offering the challenge of counting to 20. The rule is that only one person at a time can say a number. You can't go in order of the circle. And ideally, you're looking into the circle with your gaze, with your focus, so that you're really actively listening. Often people go 1, 1, 1, 1. They try to do it quickly, and soon they'll realize that slowly and actively hearing what's going on is the best way to do it. And if they get to 20 after maybe 5 or more tries, there is a huge sense of achievement. Okay, so I'm running slightly out of time and I've got lots to talk about. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. I'll also put my blog on here, so if anyone has any questions, these activities are detailed in full on my blog and you can have a look. Okay, 10-second objects, very simple. You use a vocabulary set, for example, places in the town. You give one piece of vocabulary, for example, cinema. Then you say a number, 4, so 4 people in each group, and you give them 10-second countdown to make themselves into a representation of this place or this object, like a freeze frame tableau. Could be somebody eating popcorn, could be somebody being the physical building. But the most important thing is when you count down, on the 0, it has to be complete freeze and silence. And I often say, as if I'm going to take a photo, If anyone's moving, then they're out. As I said, the discipline is something that's key. So those 10-second objects are great for vocabulary. A yes-no game where the only words that you can say are either yes or no. And from that, you have to create a scene which has a clear sense of who the characters are and the context of the scene. A typical example that I give is someone proposing to someone saying, yes, and the other person saying, no, and playing with that idea. What often happens is people say yes, 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 no, 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 repeatedly. But when you stop and ask the audience, who was he? What was he doing? They don't know. And people realize then that they need to be clearer, use the words less, but use their body, their emotion, their tone of voice more in order to express it. Okay, what is it? Simply taking an object, for example, if you can see this glue stick, and saying, what is it? Well, it's a glue stick. Okay, what else can it be? It can be, for example, a mobile phone. It could be a toothbrush. It could be a hairbrush. And using different vocabulary that may be known or unknown. If it's unknown, then you can make a list of new vocabulary on the board. And that's a really great one, and you can use any classroom object. What are you doing? Simply miming, asking what you're doing, changing in, great for present continuous activities. Fairy tale in a minute is exactly what it says on the tin. You challenge them to tell a fairy tale with gesture, voice in 1 minute. Obviously, you would prep this activity by already going through the fairy tale so people know what it is, perhaps tell it in a shorter version, and then how could you do it in a minute? And this really encourages big physicality. Okay, and I'm being signaled to wrap up, so I'm just going to flip over to the last slide. I promise I won't run over too much. Disappearing dialogue, I think, is something that everybody uses in the language classroom, creating a script and then slowly erasing parts of the script or lines of the script so that people are using their own words. Emotions remote control, setting a scene, an improvised scene, and using an imagined remote control to say it in different ways, angry, happy, terrified, etc. And then underneath we've got the more obvious options of improvised scenes and writing and performing your own script. So I would say that if you are writing and performing a script, please improvise it first and start from the physical rather than start from the written. It's much easier for students to get a grip of language, pronunciation and meaning in terms of emotion if they are not handed a script to work with straight away. So that would be a really strong tip for anyone who's working with scripts or who's pressured to create a theatre performance in their school. Try starting it with improvisation, with just the characters and the idea of what happens. Okay. Why use theatre? For me, it's obvious. It's fun, it's memorable, and all of the other things that are written underneath. I think it gives us the best opportunity to discover what students really know in terms of language. What have they acquired? Are they using it in the correct context? And can they play with it? And when they play with it, they often become more confident and more fluent users. So thank you very, very much. I'm just going to paste my blog into the chat box, which is there, creativeenglishwithcarys.wordpress.com. And I apologize for rushing through it. There's too many things to share, so please get in touch if you are interested in using drama in the classroom. As Chris said earlier, I have an article on the IH Journal site about storytelling, and that's got even more practical ideas that are written down. So thank you very, very much. Please enjoy using theatre in your classroom. Thank you.
That's lovely, Carys. Thank you very much there to Carys Shannon from IH Córdoba, the Academia Britanica. And so we will head straight on to our next